So welcome everyone to our second webinar series following our pulse survey that was issued this past summer from our manufacturing distribution group here at Citrin Cooperman. Today's webinar is entitled Leveraging Technology for a Successful Manufacturing and Distribution Business. Learn how to use tech, learn how tech can help grow your business. Those of you who don't know me, my name is John Giordano. I will be the moderator today. I am an audit and advisory partner at Citrin Cooperman, primarily sitting in our Melville office. I co-lead our manufacturing and distribution practice. With me today is Steve Ronan, our principal and leader of our strategy and business transformation practice, and Kevin Ritchie, who is a principal in our technology, risk advisory, and cybersecurity practice. To wrap up today, my co-leader of the manufacturing distribution practice out of Braintree, Mark Henry, will moderate our question and answer. Throughout today's webinar at any point, please feel free to ask a question through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen or direct message Mark directly. Okay, some of the objectives for today's webinar. Initially, we'll start with an industry survey overview and some of the lessons that we've learned at a high level. We'll talk about technology transformation. Then we'll move on to the technology risks and challenges that come with some of this technology transformation. And again, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. If you would like to receive CPE credits for today's webinar, we ask that you answer all of our CPE questions. To get things started, do you need CPE credit for today's webinar? Corinne, if you want to open that up, thank you. Give it another minute or so. Okay, the results, 71% of us joining us today would like to receive CPE credit. The other 29% are just here for the information. Thanks, Kareem. So, a brief overview of the pulse survey. So, this is something the manufacturing distribution leadership team here at Citrin Cooperman plan to do for 2020. We started the planning process probably in Q3 of 2019. But obviously, as we went through 2020 and when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, this became even more and more prevalent. So this survey was conducted in June of 2020. Again, the purpose was to take a pulse of company leaders in the manufacturing distribution industry amid this pandemic to measure the current health of their business and to take stock of the future priorities, concerns, and the challenges. To get to the core middle market, which is a lot of the businesses that we service, we asked that respondents have revenues within $10 million or above on an annual basis. The respondents who responded to this, our target audience was vice president, senior vice president of operations or above, C-suite involving CFOs, CEOs, and owners of businesses. And our target market was about 200 respondents for the survey. A general makeup that we had was on the manufacturing only side, 34%. Companies that were distribution only, 27%, and those that identify themselves as both manufacturing and distribution were more in line with the 40%. Just a quick overview there. Our second polling question here, have you had the opportunity to read the results of our industry survey? Yes, I have read it. No, I have not read it. Okay, Corinne, we can try and close that up. And the split is 34-62. I'm sorry, 38-62. 38% having read it and 62% having not yet read it. Hopefully it's not yet read it. And for those of you that haven't yet, if you'd like to, it's on our landing page of our M&D practice on the Citrin Groupman website. Okay, so a little bit about what we've learned. So during our survey, we had asked the respondents, again, about 200 respondents, we asked them the question, what are your biggest keys to your future growth strategy? So we asked them to select their top two. And as you could see, while new products was one of the keys, it was outpaced by technology and e-commerce. To some of us, really not much of a surprise in that even before the pandemic, a lot of companies were shifting to more of an online presence and then thrust more into it as we saw brick and mortar stores being closed down. A lot of the retail during the pandemic weren't able to visit physically online, so you had to shift to online. Again, technology came in about 47%, e-commerce about 42%, new products 36%. Entering new markets was another area that we saw some of our respondents say they want to grow their business. Adding salespeople and mergers and acquisitions are around 20%. Again, we asked them to select their top two. So COVID-19 has changed distribution in a variety of ways. Most prominently, like I said, the change of product and the technology introduced, which is why we're structuring our webinar today really about that technology and what we're seeing companies out there implementing through this transformation. Revenues and earnings were surprisingly steady, and no surprise, the best performers had more traction with their e-commerce. And again, to summarize, technology and e-commerce rank highest for the biggest factors for future growth as per our respondents. Some of the key takeaways, we asked our respondents to respond with, they select all that apply in terms of what advanced technologies are they using today? So what advanced technologies are they implementing in their business today that they're seeing and using to position themselves for future growth? So about 75% had cloud computing. You'll see advanced analytics, the Internet of Things, AI, blockchain, virtual reality, RPA, 3D printing, and some said none. But these are all things, like I said before, that we have seen to start into the marketplace with Industry 4.0, and we believe have been started to be thrusted into the forefront as a result of the pandemic and a lot of business moving more online, not necessarily strategic, not necessarily driven by strategy and the onset, but obviously as a pivot throughout this pandemic. So 68% of our respondents indicated online sales have grown. Again, not much of a surprise over the last 12 months. Technology adoption has been strong, but it needs to be even stronger for the future. Cloud computing and advanced analytics used by about 2/3 of our respondents. 95% of our executives utilize KPIs through dashboards. And of the 95%, 14 said that they would even update these multiple times a day just to increase their real-time information and make management decisions off of. Okay, so after the brief overview, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Ronan. Again, Steve is a principal in our strategy and business transformation practice here at Citrin. So Steve, take it away.
Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it. So for those folks on the call who have not read the survey yet, I think there's going to be a pretty interesting theme throughout, which is that, there are a lot of macro level changes that are happening in manufacturing and distribution. There are, significant, not unknown changes as a result of COVID, things like changes in demand of products, increased direct to consumer needs, increased e-commerce, and these sorts of things that were probably foreseeable, but still recommend pretty substantial shifts in a lot of businesses. And what's underlying a lot of that is there are changes that need to be made to the way that businesses operate. And that has wider ranging impact than it may seem on the, at the head of that statement, right? Because the changes are not just about, buying new technology and letting them settle in. It's not like buying a refrigerator so that you can have refrigerated milk. it's more structural and operational than that. And the changes, whether they're around for 6 months or are secular and will be with us for a long time, to business models, to business strategies, and to operating strategies, will require technology to drive how they're operationalized. And that's really what I want to kind of put out there at the beginning of this presentation, because as we talk about tools, right, we always want to think about those tools contextually with how the business itself needs to change, and then start to understand how technology needs to enable those changes. So, Karim, we can go to the next slide. Let's start off with a little bit of a question with that framing. So, are you planning to make investments in your technology over the next 12 months? So, broadly speaking, let's think of this as a 2021 change. Do we know that we're going to need changes? Do we know that we're not going to do any changes because of different reasons in the business? Or are we going to sort of wait to see how things evolve in the economy before making those decisions? We'll leave that up for a few seconds to give everyone a chance to respond. All right, so that's pretty resounding, actually. So that yes, 71% of the folks on the call are planning to make changes in their technology, with another 2 who are going to wait and see, and 2 who won't. So very, very interesting. I would say consistent with what we're seeing on our clients. There's a lot of different technology out there, and there's a lot of ways to invest in it. But what's clear in this report, and actually we've done some other research projects over the last several months that have really pointed to largely the same thing. There are a few opportunities here that seem to be more significant and more capable, more accessible in the short term than others. So, robotic process automation, certainly one of those areas that maybe there haven't been as many companies who have experimented with this, especially in the middle market yet. This manufacturing survey indicates that only about 31% of companies have explored it so far. This is something that has come down to the middle market. The costs are now more in line with what companies can not only bite off from a cost standpoint, but what will generate real tangible cash benefits in a shorter term than they used to now. So companies that haven't looked at this are starting to reevaluate whether there are manual business processes that can be automated, and how quickly they can realize the benefits of automating those processes. Analytics is a recurring theme, not just in this survey, but really all of the other research that we're doing across industries. Analytics is really a focus for a lot of companies. One of the interesting metrics here is that, there are a lot of respondents that are using KPIs to manage their business, but only about 14% of them are using KPIs on what we would call on an operationalized basis to make those decisions. So even though the majority of companies are using them on a monthly basis at the very least, so there's some blended key performance indicators or KPIs and metrics, that means that those are still primarily backward-looking metrics, right? You're using information on something that's already happened, sometimes business events that happened well in the past, to make those decisions. With so few companies using analytics that are actually embedded in how they make operating decisions on an ongoing basis, that indicates there's a real opportunity here for a lot of companies. Because as we've seen, managing gross margins, managing even net margins is really done in the details of what happens on a day-to-day basis. It's not necessarily as easy to make decisions to influence those returns when you're looking at data that's that happened a month ago or a few months ago. So starting to take a blended approach to analytics that include KPIs and information about the financials on a monthly basis, but that also include KPIs around revenue, KPIs around operating performance and cost performance, and starting to cascade those down to middle management and even staff levels to numbers that they can use, daily, multiple times a day, if not in real time, is really a significant opportunity for a lot of companies. And again, based on the research, a lot of companies have already, have a lot of the elements of what it takes to enable these, which means it's not as much of a leap to get from not having them to having them as maybe it was a few years ago. Other big opportunity is, how e-commerce is measured and being used to generate revenue. What we've seen is that a lot of companies that have used e-commerce to explode their sales, in this survey, it looks like about 77% of those companies are actually using Amazon as their primary platform. That represents a real fundamental shift in the business model. You actually make your money differently when delivering direct to consumers than when you're delivering either through wholesalers or direct to, in larger shipments and larger fulfillment batches. And what happens is you start to see effects throughout the entire supply chain and effects in the fulfillment cycle in order to drive gross revenue. Companies that have made the shift abruptly often don't have the financial models yet built out to understand how their gross profit changes on a fulfillment basis and a parcel by parcel fulfillment basis. And if that's the case, those companies should really start to get those models in place and get the measurement tools in place to allow them to understand how those gross margins are being impacted. But also on the revenue side, when we talk about cost of customer acquisition, average order sizes, cart abandonments, and then all the supply chaining that goes into fulfilling those orders, that's a lot of metrics that companies haven't necessarily had to manage to before. So we really encourage companies that have made this switch to e-commerce to start to take a more structural look at how it changes their business, in addition to just using it to capture that additional revenue. There's a lot more uplift that you can see in moving to more of a direct-to-consumer model. And then finally, FP&A, forecasting, planning, analytics. Only 44% of companies in this survey are occasionally evaluating the profitability of their product lines. Now, that's something that's very specific. But when you start to think of what that means for customer level profitability analysis, scenario modeling for new lines or the retirement of lines, and thinking about how you use forecasting and scenario modeling to make decisions that will, be implemented in the future, and understanding how that will impact your cash management and impact your decision-making in the future. Big opportunity. I would say that FP&A, if we look at our clients who have come to us with really significant technology needs over the last 6 months, FP&A really far outpaces a lot of the other technology needs we're seeing, especially if you include analytics in that. So, it's an achievable end. 8 to 12 weeks of time and investment can get you to better FP&A capabilities. And it's also an end that starts to add value very, very quickly to the companies that choose to invest in it. And we can go to the next slide. So let's think about some key concepts that we can group our technology investments into. The first, decision support, right? When we talk about FP&A, we talk about analytics, we talk about just better reporting. Those are broadly considered tools for decision support, helping management make better decisions about the business. Performance management is that second really significant area of capability. So getting transparency in how to improve financial performance, often through costs, but sometimes through labor efficiencies, supply chain and operating efficiencies, distribution network efficiencies, getting transparency to how the business is taking advantage of all those channels is really important. And then finally, ecosystems. Moving from a singular one sort of solution event to a more of an integrated set of solutions it becomes really important. And it means that you start to have to look at things in the context of not just whatever your ERP system is or whatever your warehouse management system is, et cetera, but also about how all of this technology works together. So let's talk about each of these real quickly. Decision support. Level 1, maturity on decision support. What already happened in the business? Why did it happen, right? The simplest view of this are the reports that you might get on a monthly basis. Your operating reports about how your either manufacturing operations have performed or your distribution that operations have performed, or your financials, your P&L balance sheet and cash flow statement. That can also include some KPIs and metrics that are based on that information, but it's the key attribute of this is that it's always looking at what already occurred in the business. When we go to level 2 maturity on decision support, we start to ask what the business is doing right now and why is it doing that, right? What's happening in the current state. And for that, the tool sets start to be a little different. Manufacturers that have started to move towards Lean Six Sigma sorts of concepts on the floor and have started to track scorecards on like a daily basis or on a shift basis, and they're posting them publicly. That's an example of level 2 decision support. What's happening in the business basically right now? Why is it happening? And how can we influence that to some sort of better operational end or financial end? And then the level 3 is that forward-looking view. What might happen and what will influence how it's happened. Now, the technology that's required for all of these is really a lot different from one another, right? Level 1, you're basically running reports off of your operating systems and your financial systems, and you can usually do all that natively. It might mean that you're building out some additional reporting capabilities within those natural tool sets, but for the most part, you're not talking about expanding the tool sets beyond your core ERP or operating systems. Level 2 is where we do start to talk about that, because that requires a deeper level of analysis that can happen much faster and much more flexibly than static reports that occur within the ERP system. Some companies are doing this in Excel right now, where you might have like an operating analyst and they're taking data out of your operating systems, transforming them in Excel, and presenting the results. But what we really want to start to get companies to when we start to talk about level 2 are real-time dashboards, or at least dashboards that are updating multiple times a day and don't require any manual input. The system is generating the data, it's presenting the data, and you see it as it's happening. Level 3 requires that third tool set that I mentioned earlier, which is they're called enterprise performance management or corporate performance management systems. And that's what allows you to start taking all of that data that you're digesting in level 2 and forecasting it into the future, generally in much more rigorous operating and financial models. So that's really what we talk about when we think about decision support. The enablers, you got to have great ERP systems. One of the biggest things that happens when we start to talk to companies about dashboarding is, there's process improvements that need to be made so that we can capture more process data. And there's generally changes to the ERP systems that have to happen. Think about something really basic like real-time labor tracking. If you're not checking into and out of jobs, if you're not checking material into and out of jobs, it's really hard to generate data at a job level, right? And there's ERP changes that are required to enable that. And there might be additional, add-ons or pieces of technology to enable that. And that kind of theme can happen repeatedly throughout that assessment of the current systems. And the last thing I would point out here is there's often staffing changes that need to be made. If everybody's at a transactional level, then they're not really they don't have time to digest the data, come up with what the new pieces of decision support that the business wants are, and then do the initial, root cause analysis, deeper analysis under that data on an ongoing basis. So your businesses need to start to look at freeing up bandwidth from their current staff and management team to really properly leverage the outcomes of this decision support tool set. All right, we can go on to the next slide. All right, so that second piece of tech that I talked about, performance management tech. The big thing here is you're linking your business plan to all of the financial resources that you need in order to manage the deep performance of the business. So, I think I already mentioned most of the components of this. What we're really trying to do is get down to a transparency in costs and revenue that allow you to deeply manage the performance of your business. This is where you would start making changes to labor pools, to maybe staffing levels, to scheduling, and to fixed expenses and variable expenses that would really start to generate, really drop to EBITDA is what you're generally targeting here. Okay. A lot of the tech is similar to Endo Decision Support, but you go about it differently. If performance management is really the focus rather than like scenario modeling as an example, those are different types of EPM solutions that enable that. So this is when we start to talk about ecosystems, which I'll get to in a second. You really want to have an understanding of what you need to achieve and what your priorities are before you start to select these solutions, because you don't want to start to put EPM systems in place or analytic systems in place that maybe work really well for one part of your decision support, but start to not get you the depth that you need on the performance management side of it. You really want to take a more holistic view of what your business requirements are when you're choosing those tools. Let me go to the next slide. Ecosystem. So look at the main message here. It all starts with ERP. It doesn't end with it. We always have to look at the existing ERP systems, how they're being used, how they're configured or designed, and how they might need to change in order to enable a lot of the higher level reporting that we're talking about. The data, the quality of the data that's in the ERP system, the way it comes out of the ERP system, and then how it's linked with all of the other technology assets that you have is crucial. Now, in the survey, 75% of respondents said they're already using cloud computing resources. That sounds like a simple thing. It's not when we start to talk about ecosystems. That's really, really crucial, because when we're in the cloud, we already have a lot of native integration to other cloud solutions, and it starts to get easier to get better data quality and be able to use the right tools for the job, rather than be scared about what it's going to take to integrate the data between all these different tools. So, what we usually want is a really focused cloud-based ERP system that is nimble, and it allows easier, lower cost, and faster integrations, so that we can curate all the tools that are required around that ERP system, that around the specific business requirements and getting those right tools for the job. Now, 10 years ago, that was a really scary proposition for good reasons. It was much harder, much more expensive to build and to manage the operations of those types of ecosystems. That's not the case anymore. The technology has come a long way, especially cloud technology has come a long way to enabling that, and meaning that it's a really viable way to look at your technology assets, even as a smaller company. And it gives you a lot of more flexibility about choosing the best tools for the tasks that you need to do in order to execute, your operations in your business. But you need to curate them, and they need to be governed, and you need to have management input and accountability for the tools that get selected and implemented. But when we sit down with clients and start to be really deliberate and structured about how we define requirements, how we look at strategy and the tech that enables it, and how that all comes together in a nice cohesive ecosystem, you can start to build these really powerful enterprise technology platforms quickly and efficiently in a way that we just couldn't do 10 years ago. So this is a big mindset shift, and it opens a ton of possibilities for our clients. We can actually skip over this, Corinne, and go to the next slide. So really specifically, ERP, we always want it to be cloud-based. We do want it to be more modern, getting away from, older legacy solutions. Even when legacy solutions are on somebody else's server, they're not true cloud from an architecture perspective, and we want to get everybody on a cloud-based architecture. Process efficiency, big topic when we're talking about how to build an ecosystem. We want as much transactional automation as possible, things like automating billing, automating payables, sometimes automating inventory transactions, right? Specific transactional automation. Robotic process automation, this is where that starts to come into play, and we start to be able to automate activities that are occurring across multiple systems, eliminating manual effort around entry and processing and these sorts of things. And then finally, close management, which is always, close management's funny because it always sounds like it's the boring kind of financial accounting solution. But it's hard to realize at the outset is how much a really fast, high quality close enables for decision support. If we can get great close management in place so that we're getting reliable, regular, hard closes of the books, we start to be able to do 30% more, 40% more from a decision support perspective. So it's actually a really big deal. And then decision support, we talk about consolidated financial reporting, FP&A, and analytics. Those are the specific tool sets that we talk about when building out ecosystems. And then just to give people an example, because I think people always say, well, how do my current tool sets fit into this? You know, just to bring that to life for products that a lot of people have probably heard of, you know, ERP, right? That's your Microsoft Dynamics, your NetSuite, your Epicors, Infors, et cetera. That's what we talk about when talking about ERP. Process efficiency, transactional automation, something like AvidXchange is a specific, you know, procure to pay and AP automation tool, something like an Anytime Collect for AR. RPA, which we do a lot of work in. You've heard of the big guys like UiPath, Automation Anywhere. You may not have heard of some of the middle market players that are really credible and powerful in the middle market space, like a Plenidata, who we do quite a bit of work with. Close management, Flowcast, Trintech. You know, the Trintech tool that we use is called Adra. So really viable middle market solutions. For decision support, Planful, which used to be called Host Analytics, Profix, Vena. Those all sort of, you know, play on both sides of the EPM bracket. You've got the consolidated reporting and FP&A. And then on analytics, if you've heard about Tableau and Power BI, which we use a lot, and Qlik, those are the types of specific analytics solutions that you know may be coming into play if you're trying to build out that platform. So that's all from an enterprise technology perspective. When we think about the themes in this M&D report, we think about what companies have invested and haven't invested in. This is really where we see companies in the middle market needing to focus on and look at over the next 12 months. When you're thinking about your investments, think about it along these lines. Think about it holistically. What ecosystem do I need to drive results and drive management support for our business? And then, you know, be deliberate about how you build these out. We build roadmaps for all of our clients to spread the spend, to do it in a smart way that gets benefits faster and upfront, and it prevents you from trying to boil the ocean and take on too much work and too much change at once. And that, if anything, I think is really the message that I'd like to leave you with today. You should be looking at all these areas, but don't look at them all at once. Be smart about how you build and roll out your roadmap. And that's something that we're very well equipped to help mid-market manufacturing and distribution companies with. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin, who can now talk about all of the risks that are inherent in the businesses now and that you have to continue to think through as you build out these ecosystems and leverage new tools. So Kevin, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. I hope everyone's viewing today is doing well and navigating the pandemic in good health. I'll be covering some of the cybersecurity risks associated with the M&D technologies found on our survey. But before we get underway, let's just take a moment to answer our last CPE question of the presentation. Does your organization conduct periodic cybersecurity risk assessments? A moment to take care of that. Okay, all right, so it looks as though almost 2/3 of our viewers today are conducting these on a regular basis. That's great. Unfortunately, a few people have not been conducting those, so we can maybe talk about you know, what could potentially come out of not conducting those assessments. So, all right, so let's get underway. All right, so let's begin by taking a moment to look at just how prevalent cybersecurity threats have become. Over the last several years, data breaches have been making headlines on an all too frequent basis, with no industry spared from their impact, including retail, government, healthcare, sports, politics, entertainment, and unfortunately, manufacturing and distribution. Just a few of the businesses finding themselves in the recent breach news cycle include Mashable, Compal, a manufacturer of MacBooks, several high-profile law firms, Barnes & Noble, eyewear giant Luxottica, and even Dickey's Barbecue Pit, which had 3 million credit cards compromised. At this rate, if we want to continue showing major breaches on this chart, well, to paraphrase the movie Jaws, we're going to need a bigger slide. And for every incident that makes the news, there are thousands more that are happening under the media's radar. The bottom line, there's nowhere left to hide, so we all have to do our part to avoid becoming that next data breach headline. Next slide, please. So we know that breaches are happening at an alarming rate, but who's really behind these attacks? In terms of the threat actors, this slide provides us with a look at the nefarious individuals that we're up against. To help reduce some of the anxiety generated during this discussion, we've converted these terrifying criminal threats into brightly color-coded emojis. But these threats range from hacktivists, who are hackers who take umbrage with organizations or individuals that hold differing beliefs, to criminals who have monetized cybercrime, all the way to terrorists and nation states who utilize cyber attacks for disrupting critical infrastructure or even taking lives. One dramatic example of weaponized cyber attacks is Stuxnet, which was malware introduced into a uranium enrichment facility in Iran, causing equipment to malfunction, ultimately leading to the destruction of hundreds of nuclear centrifuges. There's growing belief that the next world war will not be waged on battlefields, but behind keyboards and mice. And while these threat actors already make cybersecurity an almost untenable challenge, thanks to COVID, things have gotten much, much worse. Next slide, please. Due to the immediacy of the COVID-19 outbreak, traditional technology structures were forced to undergo a nearly instantaneous transformation, with employees displaced from the safety of traditional offices, scattered to relatively dangerous work-from-home environments. A metamorphosis of this magnitude involved the rapid expansion of remote connectivity solutions, with little time to test that proper security controls, such as multi-factor authentication and monitoring, were effective at such a massive and unprecedented scale. These technology risks are further compounded with vulnerabilities related to the usage of unsecured personal computers and home-grade networking equipment that do not have the resiliency or receive the same level of patching and firmware updates that corporate equipment does. Then there's the danger of holding sensitive meetings within earshots of roommates, family members, and now ubiquitous smart devices such as Amazon Echo and Google Home. These technology risks were further amplified with vulnerabilities related to the usage of unsecured personal computers. Factor in an onslaught of spear phishing and malware attacks perpetrated by criminals looking to take advantage of the chaos and the inherent distractions of working from home, and the results are exponentially more dangerous place to work. The following curated statistics confirm that COVID's terrifying impact is not theoretical, but instead all too real. For example, social engineering attacks are up over 600% since the pandemic began, with criminals developing a wide array of COVID-related attack vectors. Malware attacks, including ransomware, are up over 800%. There are thousands of newly deployed high-risk coronavirus-themed domain names flooding search engine results, including a malware-infected facsimile of the Johns Hopkins University COVID dashboard that was particularly effective. Even Google is blocking 18 million malware and phishing emails related to coronavirus each day. During the time spent just on this slide, over 40,000 email attacks will have been blocked. The threats are all too real, and they continue to evolve, growing in size, strength, and sophistication each and every day. In addition to these cybersecurity risks that pose a danger to everyone, let's take a look at some of the threats that are specific to the technologies covered on our survey. Next slide, please. Blockchain technology increasingly receives attention as a next-generation solution to a wide variety of transactional and record-keeping problems, including cryptocurrencies and managing supply chains. And manufacturers are among the biggest adopters of this technology. Our survey results back this up, as over 42% of respondents are using blockchain in their business. Applications built on blockchain technology undoubtedly hold some exciting possibilities. Gaining greater cost savings, enhancing traceability, and enhancing transparency are just some of the primary drivers behind blockchain investments for M&D businesses. But this technology is still considered in its infancy, and many security concerns remain. Security experts agree that every new blockchain product must undergo vigorous training and testing before being released to the public. Incentivized to be the first with the release of an application, some projects are tempted to launch their insufficiently tested code on live blockchains, and the repercussions can be damaging and long-lasting. For example, hackers exploited a defect in the source code of the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, a virtual organization operated using smart contracts and built on the Ethereum public blockchain. This resulted in the theft of Ethereum tokens valued in excess of $50 million at the time of theft. Before utilizing a blockchain-based solution, be sure to do your due diligence in order to avoid a poorly designed product. And in terms of the most common point of vulnerability with blockchain technology, it's the end point where humans and blockchains meet. Since it's impossible for cyber criminals to guess a user's private encryption keys, they've focused their efforts on attempting to steal them. And the best chance of pilfering these encryption keys is to attack the most vulnerable point in the entire system, such as a personal computer or mobile device, using social engineering attacks. Obtaining these keys can allow criminals with many opportunities, including the ability to drain account balances or inject malicious code in or out of a blockchain application. So to avoid this outcome, it is of paramount importance to protect those wallets and private keys. Next slide, please. Artificial intelligence has been a tremendous benefit to the manufacturing distribution industry, providing significant cuts in unplanned downtime, better designed products, a streamlined supply chain, and improved efficiency. However, Tesla founder Elon Musk said that artificial intelligence is humanity's biggest existential threat, and that it poses a fundamental risk to the existence of civilization. And this comes from a guy who manufactures and sells flamethrowers. So, while the argument as to whether AI is good or evil could be its own presentation, let's focus instead on the benefits and risks to the M&D industry. Manufacturing is estimated to generate about 2 exabytes of data this year, more than virtually any other industry. To help visualize how much data that is, if it was stored on floppy disks and stacked end to end, it could reach the moon and back almost 180 times. This has resulted in decision-making processes becoming increasingly more complex, leading manufacturers to find ways of processing information more efficiently via artificial intelligence so that issues can be addressed proactively. And while AI and advanced analytics offer many positive benefits, they can lead to significant unintended or maliciously intended consequences for organizations. One example of the security risks related to AI is the feeding of malicious instructions into an AI system, implementing slight changes to parameters or making scenarios that are designed to avoid setting off any alarms while gradually driving AI in their desired direction. Where attackers lack access to data sets, they may employ evasion, tampering with inputs to force mistakes. By modifying input data to make proper identification difficult, AI systems can be manipulated into misclassification. A key to successfully adding artificial intelligence to a company's toolbox is to integrate security considerations into the front end of project planning via a holistic risk management approach. Taking this proactive strategy provides enhanced protection is more cost-effective than adding security measures post-implementation, or worse yet, after an incident has already occurred. Partnering with an external risk management consultant with experience in manufacturing technology would be a very worthwhile exercise so that a security strategy can be tailored to your business and its needs while implementing AI solutions. From there, it's critical to protect your IT environment in order to avoid cyber criminals gaining a foothold into your AI systems. Next slide. Since 84% of respondents said that they are currently using cloud computing, I won't waste much time singing the praises of the cloud or whether it will someday supplant on-premise platforms. The votes have been in for a while, and we have a clear winner, thanks to cloud computing's ability to be scaled almost instantaneously in response to business needs and delivered in a secure and predictable pay-as-you-go model. However, while the benefits are many, storing data in the cloud does not instantly allow a business to assume that they have no role in the security of their data. Cyber criminals, as you would expect, have taken notice of this massive shift to the cloud. Well, the level of difficulty involved with hacking a cloud platform is much greater due to 24/7 security teams and state-of-the-art security controls. The rewards are exponentially higher thanks to so many eggs being in one basket. An ominous statistic that backs this up can be found in the latest Verizon data breach investigation data, which reported that 43% of breaches involved web applications. So while it provides amazing advantages over on-premise computing, when you use the cloud, you have to prepare for some rain. And what can we do to ensure that our data is safe and secure as it can be? Half of the battle is ensuring that the cloud provider is securing your data, and the other half is that your end users are utilizing best practices for accessing the data. Let's begin with the cloud provider. While research and recommendations are important to determining whether your cloud provider is doing what's necessary to fortify the security around your data, obtaining a service organization control or SOC report is a much better way to determine their efforts. A SOC report, which is an independent review of security, privacy, confidentiality, availability, and/or processing integrity, is available from any cloud provider worth their salt. These reports are typically refreshed once a year and should be reviewed in detail, especially the section that details the complementary user entity controls. It's here where you'll find the controls that the vendor has included within its system that can achieve the control objectives only if you have implemented certain controls within your environment. For example, if you're not doing user reviews and an unauthorized employee has access to sensitive data, the best cloud provider in the world won't be able to help you. And if your vendor doesn't have a SOC report, that's a big red flag, and you should have an immediate discussion with your rep as to when one will be available. In addition to reviewing SOC reports, you should also conduct an annual risk assessment of your cloud providers. Are they in alignment with any new compliance requirements your business needs to meet? For example, with the rollout of a new cybersecurity maturity model certification or CMMC, is your cloud provider doing what they need to do in order to meet the regulation? One final recommendation is to have an incident response plan in the event that your cloud provider is taken offline. We had several clients that experienced their cloud provider being waylaid by a ransomware attack in 2020, and they were unable to generate financial reports, track employee timesheets, or even invoice their clients for several weeks. If that happened to your business, do you have a plan that provides workarounds to continue operations until your provider is back online? If not, the impact could be significantly worse for your company. The other side of the security equation is the end user. If good security practices are not established, a significant security vulnerability could exist. For example, are users required to use multi-factor authentication when accessing the cloud application? Are passwords required to be complex and periodically changed? Are user reviews being conducted on a regular basis to ensure that the identification of an anomalous account or the timely removal of a terminated user is being done? Are you providing security awareness training so that your end users are less susceptible to having their credentials compromised in a spear phishing attack? If any of these practices aren't in place, it could pave the way to a catastrophic data breach. Next slide, please. The Internet of Things, or Industrial Internet of Things, is another revolutionary technology that has opened up some incredible possibilities. Gartner's forecast database expects that there will be approximately 14 billion devices connected to the internet by 2022, changing the way we do business and how we utilize resources. Our survey showed that 2/3 of M&D companies are utilizing IoT technology, which matches global statistics showing that this sector has been the most impacted by this technology over the last few years. The benefits of IoT are many, including data analysis, automation, predictive maintenance, and so much more. However, like blood in the water, every technology advancement brings cyber predators, and IoT is no exception. Cyber criminals are working day and night to compromise IoT devices, and all it takes is one security shortcut that results in an opportunity for bad actors to take control. And unfortunately, these issues are relatively common, as the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency listed more than 1,200 IoT system-related vulnerabilities. Once a criminal can take advantage of these security flaws, that's where things get ugly. Examples of the damage that can be done, ranging from surreptitious surveillance and data siphoning, to taking control of the compromised device, to commanding a network of Trojanized devices to take down a network in a distributed denial of service attack. Some real-life examples include the world's largest semiconductor manufacturer was shut down after a WannaCry malware variant spread throughout their production network. a terminated and disgruntled engineer who had access to a water and sewage company's SCADA system opened the valves so that sewage was dumped everywhere. Hackers took control of a steel mill's production management software in the industrial control system, causing devastating physical damage. So what are some best practices to help avoid these types of cyber attacks with manufacturing IoT devices? First, inventory all devices and check in with the manufacturers on a regular basis to determine if there are any firmware updates that can be applied to patch any potential vulnerabilities. For users that access these devices, ensure that they are receiving the cybersecurity training needed to avoid social engineering attacks, such as spear phishing, which account for over 91% of data breaches. Also, utilize good password policies for all devices and never leave default passwords in place. And finally, consider segmenting your network so that IoT devices and sensors that control the pumps, valves, turbines, or anything else on the SCADA systems are on a separate network to the rest of the IT infrastructure. At this point, many of you may be considering cutting power to your servers, selling your laptops on eBay, and trading in your mobile devices for rotary telephones. But thankfully, I'd like to say that that may not be necessary. Investing time and resources into cybersecurity and securing the technologies discussed here today should go a long way towards reducing your risks and keeping your business safe and secure. I'd now like to turn things over to Mark Henry to lead us through the Q&A component of today's presentation. Mark?
Great job, Kevin. Thank you. You've obviously got people thinking about technology and maybe looking around their rooms right now, because we do have 2 questions so far. And I think this first one is for you. Are there privacy risks related to having a home assistant such as an Amazon Echo near your home workspace?
Okay, take a shot at that one, Mark. Thank you. There are many dangers associated with these smart speaker devices, ranging from a compromised account to some more creative hacking techniques. For example, researchers were able to recently make the microphones in an Alexa respond to light as if it were sound, so that by using a laser to send light commands to a smart assistant, researchers were able to force an Alexa device to unlock a car, adjust a thermostat, open a garage door, and so much more. Another example comes from the cybersecurity firm Check Point, which just published its latest research documenting major vulnerabilities related to cross-site scripting, which allowed researchers to access Alexa accounts and in turn, personal data, including some of the recordings of voice there. So Amazon said that they have since corrected these issues, but who knows what other vulnerabilities exist. So certainly be careful. People working at home may have that Alexa device or Google Home device on their desk. You may want to just give consideration to turning it off when you're in any type of sensitive meetings or any type of call. So.
All right, I just walked across the room and unplugged my Alexa, so that's, thank you for that. Next question, this one might actually be for Steve. My company has limited resources. Are there any technology investments I should prioritize above others?
Well, it's going to be different for every company, of course, but broadly speaking, the first thing you want to do is understand how much the investment's going to be, right? So depending on how much you've invested in improving your technology infrastructure over the last 3 to 5 years, that number might be significant, it might not be. So the first thing to do is invest in the assessment itself. The next thing to do is really understand whether there are foundational investments that are required to get some of the higher order things. So, they might include things like I mentioned earlier around the ERP types of improvements, those other operating systems type of improvements to make sure that you're getting enough process information about the business. Until then, a lot of the other higher order things can be done, offline. If you have a real need for analytics, we might be able to put in like a quick, Power BI sort of tool set. But for the most part, you want to focus on those foundational things first. Try to create enough of a platform so that as soon as you put in the higher level tools, they're generating value from day one. That's what's really important. You don't want to put in tools and have them sort of linger or not generate the benefits that you're assuming they will because you haven't done the underlying work. That's the big thing.
Got it. It looks like one more question just came in, and just to remind everyone, if you either want to use the chat function for the group or send them to me directly, we can ask one more before we close out. This one's probably for Kevin. So what are some best practices related to cybersecurity awareness training?
All right, Mark, thank you, sir. All right, so to provide the necessary awareness, which is so critical today, as we just talked about, every business should develop a training program delivery format and duration that meets their specific needs in order to maximize their employees' ability to retain key concepts. For example, since most organizations have users working from home, a concise on-demand video training might be optimal. This training should be provided during the onboarding process, before a user even puts fingers on a keyboard, and then repeated at least annually for the entirety of the organization. Additional focus training should then be provided to anyone with direct contact with sensitive information. For example, protected health information, personally identifiable information, or if you accept payment cards, PCI information. An extra focus should be placed on detecting and avoiding social engineering attacks, which, as we mentioned during the presentation, is the most prevalent attack vector used by cyber criminals. You have to really understand that you're going to be constantly bombarded with these types of emails looking to steal your credentials or have you reply with sensitive information. So again, it is critical that your training program has a pretty good focus on how to avoid in those types of attacks.
And just ask a follow-up to that, because Kevin, I know we've done this with several clients already. When you're kind of working on these training programs or helping clients implement them, there's a flexibility with them, right? You know, as you kind of go into it, you kind of screen people who's someone I need to spend more time on, who's someone I need to, you know, or already has good practices. How do you kind of get the lay of the land and decide who to focus in on more that may need more training and may need more videos and coaching?
Absolutely, Mark. Great question. So yeah, so a trust but verify approach is a really, really great strategy. And what that means is, in addition to providing that training, which is great, and hopefully everyone will retain those concepts, but you may want to, supplement that training with a spear phishing campaign, which means you basically simulate a bad guy and you send, spear phishing, emails to each of your employees. And what you'll be able to do over a period of time, you'll be able to see, all right, this group is really resistant to falling for these types of attacks. But unfortunately, this group here, they're very prone to clicking on these links and opening attachments, which if it were from a real spear phishing attack, could be detrimental, could bring the business to its knees. So that's a great point, Mark. So in addition to that training, again, supplement it with a spear phishing simulation that allows you to really, test out who in fact is really retaining those topics. And for the people that aren't, initially, you want to provide some additional training, and then you can, work with your HR department to go from there. It maybe require a one-on-one talk between perhaps management or IT and that individual. And then if it continues beyond that, it could get more severe depending on what you're willing, what your HR department is willing to do. So yeah, that's a great point, Mark. So again, training important, but you want to back that up by verifying that they are in fact retaining those topics.
So looking down, we're at about 1 o'clock, and we want to kind of stay on task for everybody. So just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Steve and Kevin, you were fantastic. So thank you for sharing everything that you're seeing in the marketplace and what you can do. And kind of to close it up with what John opened with is, we saw 50% of the respondents had not yet seen the survey. When you see a closing for this webinar, we will be also sending you a link for the survey so you can access it if you have not already. So thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.